Indianapolis, Detroit, the third and fourth largest cities in the Midwestern United States, the second and seventh largest metropolitan areas in the Midwest. They are separated by fewer than 300 miles, and there are exactly 0 Amtrak trains per day connecting these two cities. If you're stubborn enough about taking the train that you actually decide to take one between these two cities, you'll need to take one to Chicago and then transfer to a train heading to Detroit. Oh, and I should also add that the train heading from Indianapolis to Chicago runs 3 times a week, meaning that there are only some days when you can take the train from Indianapolis to Detroit by way of Chicago. That by itself is worth talking about. The fact that Indianapolis and Chicago's train stations are connected by a train line that runs only 3 times a week. But that would get us off topic from this video, which is the fact that Indianapolis and Detroit lack a direct connection to each other in the rail network, despite both their size and proximity. So how can one fix this gap between Indianapolis and Detroit? With a rail line connecting the two cities, of course. The route I'm proposing would be high-level, medium-speed rail, with an aim for average speeds of about 85 miles per hour. The start of this line, connecting Indianapolis to Detroit, is Evansville, Indiana. I know, what a curveball. What on earth does Evansville have to do with all this when I'm trying to connect Indianapolis to Detroit? Actually, quite a bit, if you think about it. The reason for that is because Evansville is a decent-sized city in its own right, and it is under 200 miles south of Indianapolis. And, at that, it is a city that lacks any connection to Amtrak at the moment. A city with a population of 118,000 people, the third largest city in Indiana, should be connected with 2 of the largest cities in the region, given its proximity to said cities. 175 miles away from Indianapolis and 450 miles away from Detroit. Going north on my route, use is made of either the Indiana Southern Railroad tracks or tracks paralleling those owned by the Indiana Southern Railroad. The next place of note along this path is the city of Washington, Indiana, with a population of about 12,000 people. Their downtown is about 3 miles east of the Indiana Southern Railroad tracks. So to make a Washington stop viable, I think you'll need bus service to connect the rail station to downtown Washington. The route would continue on, or paralleling the Indiana Southern Railroad tracks, until you get to a place called Swit City, which is hardly a city at a population of 268. At Swit City, the route would then take a turn so that trains go along Indiana Railroad Company tracks towards Bloomington and Indianapolis. Speaking of Bloomington, that is the next stop heading north. This is where you will have access to the University of Indiana. I would have the stop located near where tracks pass College Avenue and Walnut Street, because a stop located there would provide easy bus access to downtown Bloomington, the main part of the University of Indiana campus, as well as the football and basketball facilities for the university. It's just a good central location for a stop. The next stop north of Bloomington is one of the 2 major cities this video puts a focus on, Indianapolis. The spaghetti of tracks near downtown Indianapolis really confuse me. So if you asked me how to map out how to get trains to the train station in Indianapolis, I wouldn't be able to figure out how to get them there. But I would want to find a way to get them there, considering that a metro population of over 2 million people is currently only served by a train that operates 3 times a week. One thing I should say about the Indianapolis stop: I think you should provide trains the ability to terminate at that stop. I'm not sure you need all the trains from Detroit heading as far south as Evansville, as I imagine that trains heading south from Detroit would have a lot of passengers getting off at Indianapolis. Some trains could conceivably terminate at Indianapolis and then turn back around, heading towards Detroit. Once we get out of Indianapolis itself, I'd have trains running in a mostly northeasterly direction for a while. The train will skip a few suburbs that I think would be best served by suburban passenger rail or else a light rail line that goes into the suburbs. And as such, the next decent sized city I would have a stop at is Anderson. It has about 55,000 residents. The stop would be by Main Street in Anderson, pretty close to what looks to me like a former train stop. The building that looks like a former train stop, for the record, is now a ballet theater. The following stop is Muncie, Indiana, home to Ball State University and 65,000 residents. Ball State, for the record, has about 15,000 undergraduates as of fall 2023. So I could see this line frequented by college students, given that college students own cars at lower rates than other Americans. This Muncie stop would be within easy access of the downtown area. After Muncie, the train heads more due north, heading on or parallel to Norfolk Southern tracks. There would be a stop in Hartford City, with a population of about 6,000 people. I think a Hartford City stop will need to be complemented with better walkability between the station and its downtown, because the sidewalk near the station looks narrow, and the area near the station looks a little desolate. The following stop would be in Bluffton, which has just over 10,000 people. The tracks in Bluffton are on the west side of town, and where I have the stop located, which is where the tracks on the west side of town pass Washington Street, walkability once again needs to be improved between there and the middle of town. And then we have another heavy-hitting stop. Another stop in a large city that currently lacks Amtrak. That city is Fort Wayne, which has over 260,000 people. Because Fort Wayne is midline, not to mention not as large as Indianapolis or Detroit, I think it's easy to gloss over or not give much attention to the fact that this line would give America's 84th largest city the train station it deserves. And the geography of the existing trackage, in relation to bus connections in Fort Wayne, is nothing short of outstanding. As to why, the main bus terminal for Fort Wayne's bus system is basically next to the train tracks. So you can conceivably hop on your train to Fort Wayne and then be on any one of 9 or so bus lines within a matter of a few minutes of arriving in Fort Wayne. Paralleling or running along existing trackage, the line then winds its way into Ohio, next stopping at Bryan, Ohio, with a population of around 8,700 people as of the 2020 census. Bryan is also where the parallel with one of Amtrak's existing lines, the Lakeshore Limited, begins. The following stop would then be at Wauseon, a city of about 7,500 people. I should note that Wauseon, unlike Bryan, does not have an Amtrak station, despite being passed through by the Lakeshore Limited Amtrak line. From there, I'd have the train going to Toledo, stopping at the train stop that already exists for Toledo. You could have the train terminate in Toledo, but what I would do is have the train continue on to the existing station in Detroit, Michigan, heading north from Toledo. The smaller cities between Toledo and Detroit, such as Monroe, Michigan, and Trenton, Michigan, can and should be connected by way of local train service between Toledo and Detroit. Detroit should really have a commuter rail system, and a line connecting places such as Monroe and Trenton to Detroit should be part of that system. But that is a topic for its own video, and perhaps its own video series. So yeah, on paper, wow, what a powerhouse of a line. It includes two major universities that don't have any Amtrak service, connects to three major Indiana cities that either have no Amtrak service or barely have any Amtrak service, and connects major metropoli that currently lack any connection with each other. On paper, this is the most exciting rail line I have conceived of on this channel. But would it work well in practice? Let's find out. In order to get a sense of how good my idea actually is, I'm going to score this proposed line on 5 criteria that determine the ability of a line to get built in the first place, and then the ability of the line to succeed when built. Those 5 criteria are feasibility of proposal, time saved versus other modes of transport, population served, anticipated demand, and impact on the greater Amtrak network. I'll score all of these metrics out of 20, so that way our final score is out of 100. Let's start with the feasibility of the proposal, which I define as how easy it would be to build the tracks for the line. Given that all of the route already has trackage in place, this is not the heaviest of lifts. You'll need to build additional trackage to allow for bi-directional service, but that is the case with many lines, so it's no big deal. For this line to succeed at being competitive with driving, though, it would require a level of investment in rail transit I just haven't seen yet from the United States or the states of Indiana and Ohio. That is one factor keeping me from giving this a perfect score in the feasibility department. But otherwise, the feasibility level is high with this line. I give this an 18 out of 20 for feasibility of proposal. Now let's look at time saved versus other modes of transport. This is going to depend on which city you're traveling to or from, and which mode of transport you're using. But this chart shows major city pairs on this line that I calculated transport time to or from, depending on transport mode. In making these calculations, I don't just consider how long the journey is in the car, on the flight, or on the train. For example, I also consider the time you spend at a rest stop if you're driving a long distance, so you can use the bathroom or grab a meal. Or the recommended 2 hours ahead of a flight you should arrive at an airport for domestic flights. Well, I crunched the numbers, and I calculated that the train is competitive with the car and the airplane. Trains don't blow cars or airplanes out of the water from a time-saving standpoint. Well, at least until you consider that you can get work done while you're on the train. Something you can't say for driving. Then trains blow cars out of the water when it comes to time savings. Evaluating the totality of the numbers I crunched, plus the fact I just stated, I'll give this line a 14 out of 20 for time saved versus other modes of transport. Now to population served. Detroit's metro area has a population of nearly 4.4 million people. Indianapolis has a metro area of about 2.1 million people. It brings Amtrak to Fort Wayne, one of the 100 largest cities in the United States, and a city that doesn't have Amtrak. It brings Amtrak to Evansville, another decent-sized city. And it significantly improves Amtrak connectivity to Toledo, which is another of America's 100 largest cities. It doesn't serve one of the big 3 metro areas of New York, Chicago, or Los Angeles, but it serves major-sized populations nevertheless. I rate the population served metric as a 17 out of 20. Anticipated demand is the hardest metric of the 5 to measure here. I usually like to look at airport destination data to get a good sense of what the travel demand is like between cities. However, as Indianapolis to Detroit and Fort Wayne to Detroit are the only city pairs on this train line with flights to each other, gauging demand is a bit tricky. I counted 5 daily flights going between Indianapolis and Detroit, though, so at least there's some evidence of travel demand between those two cities. And one of the most important things that Interstate 69 does is connect Evansville, Indianapolis, and Fort Wayne to each other and other smaller cities in Indiana that my proposed route covers. This tells me that there's demand for intercity travel between the Indiana cities my route covers. Still, I'm only making educated guesses on demand here rather than having hard facts telling me that this is going to be a home run from a demand standpoint. Because of that, I can't give a score better than 12 out of 20 for anticipated demand. The last metric to consider is impact on the greater Amtrak network. This line would connect to already existing or planned lines that head to the likes of Chicago, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Washington, D.C., and New York City, meaning that this line serving major metro populations can bring people onto other trains serving other major metro populations. Therefore, I see this line as a significant benefit to the Amtrak network, potentially bringing new riders onto lines, riders that might not have previously been on those other lines. I'll give a perfect score of 20 out of 20 for this metric. All told, I give this proposed line a score of 81 out of 100. This, I think, matches up well with how I felt as I was researching this line I was proposing. Do I feel really good about the line? Yes. And I think this line would have a lot of potential if implemented. Do I think this line is a guaranteed success? I'm not convinced, especially if America were as cheap about developing this line as it is with developing other parts of the Amtrak network. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on my proposed Indianapolis to Detroit connection. Feel free to leave a comment in the comment section below. Also, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you and have a good day.